The Philippines began to go further. What happened? The Philippines even unilaterally installed solar-powered navigation buoys with the Philippine flag on 5 islands and reefs around China's Nansha Islands. This is a big deal because it involves national sovereignty and territorial integrity. Not only that, but the Philippine Coast Guard also announced that it will drop another 6 buoys to protect its territory. Obviously, this is the Philippines unilaterally challenging China. Faced with this situation, China has always dealt with it decisively and never gave the opponent a chance. China's strong countermeasures will inevitably take immediate measures in place. In order to protect our country's territorial sovereignty, we not only immediately dismantled the illegal buoys that confiscated the Philippines, but also 3 navigation light buoys were placed on Huai Reef, Oxbow Reef, and Nangjaon Reef, the first 2 of which also coincided with those on the Philippine side. The Ministry of Transport also released a message on May 24th. In fact, China is still very lenient to the Philippines, because the official news did not specifically state that it confiscated the Philippine buoys. Obviously, we still hope that the Philippines will know its way back. After all, we have endured the Philippines for more than a week. During this period, we must have communicated. It was the Philippines who toasted and refused to eat fine wine, which led to the confiscation of its buoy by China. According to reports, the Philippines navigation buoys were deployed by its Coast Guard from May 10 to 12, and the news was released on May 14. At that time, the Philippine Coast Guard claimed that it had illegally deployed buoys with the Philippine flag in 5 waters including Feaksan Island, Huangjun Island, Nanyao Island, Shuanghuang Shazhu, and Oxbow Reef in the Nansha Islands to declare the so-called Philippines' opposition to the Philippines' sovereignty over these sea areas. Of course, China can dismantle the buoys of the Philippines. If the Philippines dismantles the buoys of China, then China will only respond a tougher attitude. Therefore, the Philippines should take it easy, otherwise the consequences will be serious. In addition, during this period, the Philippines also sent patrol ships of the Coast Guard to confront Chinese patrol ships Haigzun 173 and Haigzun 09. However, this confrontation is a bit too different. Haigzun 173 is 73.3 meters long and has a displacement of 2,000 tons. Haigzun 09 is a large ship with a design displacement of 10,700 tons and a design total length of 165 meters. Compared with the Chinese coast patrol boats, the Philippine coast patrol boats feel like small sampans, only 44 meters, and the displacement is only more than 300 tons, which is not a heavy weight at all. Frankly speaking, if this collided, wouldn't the Philippine ship capsize? Why does the Philippines frequently provoke China? Comrades, please like and repost, and listen to Zanhao one by one. In Zanhao's view, there are 2 fundamental reasons why the Philippines did this. One is that the Philippines wants to curry favor with the United States, so as to play both sides between China and the United States. On the one hand, he wants to coerce the United States into self-respect and let China make concessions to the Philippines. On the other hand, he wants to curry favor with the United States by provoking China, so that the United States can sign a free trade agreement with the Philippines. The second is that the Philippines wants to use the power of the United States to encroach on China's islands and reefs in the South China Sea. Marcos Jr. is very short-sighted. He believes that he can use the power of the United States, especially by expanding the U.S. military base in the Philippines and the defense agreement with the United States, so that the United States can back him up and help him seize China's Nansha Islands and reefs. However, it is clear that China does not want the South China Sea to be really unstable, especially since China and ASEAN are already implementing the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea and held a meeting on May 17 in Ha Long City, Vietnam to implement the Declaration on the Conduct of Parties in the South China Sea. The 20th Senior Officials meeting of the Declaration, and reached an agreement to accelerate consultations and complete the South China Sea Code of Conduct within this year. In the case of the consensus of the second round of reading of the text, China does not want to disrupt this rhythm, and of course it does not want to let other ASEAN countries have their own ideas. China and ASEAN negotiators reached an agreement at the first official meeting held since June 2021. If there is no accident, once the South China Sea Code of Conduct is signed, everyone must abide by it. However, the problem now is that the Philippines is provoking, and China has to respond. There is a more important question: what if the Philippines keeps escalating its provocations? Don't think this is impossible. Maybe the Marcos government just thinks that China will be afraid of ASEAN because of this. so he can use the power of the United States to force China to swallow the bitter fruit and suffer this dumb loss. Many people may think, would little Marcos really think so? Of course, if he doesn't think so, it's best for everyone to negotiate, communicate, and reach a consensus, so as not to be used by the United States. This is China's most hopeful result. However, judging from the speculative state of Marcos in the past half a year, the reality may be more skinny, and he may really think so. In fact, this is the tragedy of a small country and a small structure. He may really think that our overall interests are weak, especially Marcos, who has lived in the United States for many years. It is not surprising that he thinks so. So, if he thinks so, what will happen to the situation? It is no exaggeration to say that if the Philippines refuse to provoke and escalate, China will the Philippines has become a hurdle that we must pass. Otherwise, after the South China Sea Code of Conduct is passed, it will become a code to restrict China, or become a dead letter. Either way, it is not what China wants, so China may have no other choice to stop and resolve related troubles with the Philippines. How will China solve the trouble? Zhang Hao believes that for the Philippines, it may be a landslide. Why do you say it was a landslide? The reason is very simple. Provocation of the Philippines, China will not attack the Philippines militarily. Of course, judging from the situation, the Philippines should not have the guts or the ability. So, if China will not take military measures against the Philippines, what kind of measures will it take? In Zhang Hao's view, WeChat official account, Zhang Hao, the best way is that China no longer needs to bear it when it can't bear it anymore, and then there will be a landslide and ground crack, and then plant a few islands to calm us down. So, what are the benefits of living in the Mancha Islands? In fact, the biggest advantage is that China has an unsinkable aircraft carrier there, which will make the South China Sea safer and more stable militarily, and the ability of the United States to disrupt the situation in the South China Sea will be offset by this. Just like before we planted the island, the US aircraft carrier swaggered in the South China Sea. What now? Every time the United States comes, it will be crowded by our warships and military aircraft. The United States will never talk about fighting tonight with China in the South China Sea. At that time in 2016, China had told the United States that if you want to go to war, we will go to war. As a result, the two US aircraft carriers ran away together. Many comrades may ask, why are you so scared to run away? Because our army reported the coordinates of the US aircraft carrier, and Dongfeng 21D or Dongfeng 26 will serve you if you don't run away. The biggest benefit of Zhongbao in the South China Sea is that the living conditions of our officers and soldiers have been greatly improved. In the past, they suffered too much. Now that we have the ability, we should provide them with better conditions for living and being on duty. The South China Sea species of islands also have great potential benefits, that is, the future economic development of the South China Sea. For example, if you want to exploit oil and gas, this is the transfer station and logistics supply base. If you want to engage in tourism, there are some big islands that are treasures for tourism. In short, there are too many benefits to count. When it comes to species of islands, many comrades in arms may be very excited, hoping that the country will have more islands and reefs. From a subjective point of view, of course, the more planted the better. Who doesn't feel this way? However, objectively speaking, the overall situation of the game between China and the United States is still more important. We cannot fall into diplomatic passiveness for the sake of planting islands and reefs, and thus lose more. But what if the Philippines provokes? When we make room again and again, but the Philippines pushes forward again and again, then we are not instigating this matter. To safeguard the country's territorial sovereignty, what does it matter if China does something? Could it be that other ASEAN countries still want to offend China by fighting against injustice for the provocation of the Philippines? The Philippines is not too much, we will all tolerate it. If the Philippines goes too far, I'm sorry. Compared with signing the so-called Code of Conduct in the South China Sea, it is obviously much more important to maintain national sovereignty. If our own national sovereignty interests are threatened, then why do we need the so-called Code of Conduct? The constraints of the Code of Conduct must be mutual, for the sake of a peaceful development environment. Therefore, if that happens, we will have to temporarily put aside other things and focus on safeguarding national sovereignty. Once it reaches that point, it will be time for the Philippines to suffer a big loss. To put it bluntly, Who can stop China from planting a few more islands? Can America stop it? Can't stop. No strength, no motivation. Therefore, in Zhanhao's view, the Philippines really pushed China into a hurry, and in the end it was just a few more islands in the South China Sea, that's all. For the Philippines, it is really wise to keep a distance from the United States, and then jointly develop oil and gas in the South China Sea with China, which is in the best interest of the Philippines. However, now that troubles are happening in the Philippines, isn't that going to make things difficult for one's own wallet? If the Philippines continues to mess around, just wait and see, there will be a good show later. In fact, most netizens may now hope that the Philippines will pick up more troubles. As the saying goes, if you don't fight, you will die. When the Philippines dies, it may be what many netizens expect. After all, no one thinks it is simply a wave of unrest, and another wave. The problem of Germany's discrimination against India has not been resolved, and Ukraine has taken the initiative to provoke India. Because the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense recently tweeted two paintings. The first is of the explosion in Sevastopol, which took place on April 29 and which Russia blames on Ukrainian drones. The second picture is a bit nonsensical. The smoke from the explosion filled the air and turned into an image similar to the Hindu goddess Kali. Moreover, the goddess Kali also posed a famous pose of Marilyn Monroe covering her skirt. The Ukrainian Ministry of Defense also happily accompanied the text, work of art. In Hindu mythology, Kali is one of the incarnations of the snow mountain goddess, the wife of Lord Shiva, symbolizing strength, death and new life, and enjoys a high status in the hearts of Hindus. Not sure if Ukraine did it on purpose. Anyway, when the cartoon of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense came out, the Indians were furious. The major media have condemned Ukraine for insulting the beliefs of Indians and seriously hurting the feelings of Indians. Gupta, a senior advisor to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting of India, tweeted and scolded, recently, the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine is seeking India's support. Behind this disguise, the true face of the Ukrainian government is hidden. This is against India all over the world. An attack on the sentiments of believers. Counting new and old hatreds together, Gupta also dug up a tweet mocking Ukraine after the Russia-Ukraine conflict last year. You have always taken an anti-India stance at the United Nations. After India's nuclear test in 1998, you voted in favor of UN Security Council sanctions on India. You pushed UN to intervene in Kashmir. You sold military equipment to Pakistan to use against India. Now, you want help from India. Well, Ukraine, you wait. Looking at the sentiment on the internet in India, many people even believe that Modi should take action to expel the Ukrainian ambassador, and Zelensky must not be invited to this year's G20 summit. The mood of Indians is very unstable, because this is the second time that India has been strongly offended recently. Just a few days ago, the old German magazine Der Spiegel published a cartoon with the theme population, India overtakes China. In the picture, there are people everywhere on an old-fashioned train, and there are people holding an Indian flag on the roof, and the train passes through the smoke and dust. Beside it is an advanced bullet high-speed rail with neat tracks and a Chinese flag. The Chinese may smile knowingly when they see it, but the lungs of many Indians are about to explode. Gupta, a senior advisor to the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting of India, yes, the Gupta mentioned above, criticized this as outrageous racism against India. There is no similarity in India's reality. They just want to let India down, they just want to please China. Alas, a cartoon, China is also lying down. Chandrasekhar, Minister of State for Electronics and Information Technology of India, even called out Dear Der Spiegel cartoonist in a mocking tone, saying, although you want to laugh at India, this is not optimistic about India led by Prime Minister Modi. Not smart people. In a few years, India's economy will be bigger than Germany's. Germany you wait, India will overtake you immediately. Looking at the analysis of foreign media, this cartoon has aroused Indians' strong dissatisfaction with the superiority of the West. It should be in 2014. The New York Times published a cartoon mocking India for sending a probe into Mars orbit. In the cartoon, an Indian farmer led a cow and knocked on the door marked Space Elite Club. The Indians were furious. You looked down on us and laughed at our cattle. Anyway, the New York Times apologized after the Indians strongly protested. Now, under the strong protest of the Indians, the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense hastily deleted the tweet, and the German ambassador to India, Ackerman, hastened to appease. This cartoon is not funny. I think many subways in Germany are not as good as yours in India. Finally, what do you think? Simple 3 points. First, India is sometimes sensitive. A cartoon, the whole country protests. Ukraine was disgraced, and the German ambassador hurried to show his favor. There is no small matter in diplomacy. If you don't pay attention, it may ferment into a diplomatic crisis. You must be more careful. But at the same time, you can also see India's sensitive points. Of course, there is somewhat resentment against the West behind this. I remember 2 years ago, Modi complained publicly that someone was planning to slander India, including Indian tea and yoga. So, don't easily say that Indian tea and yoga are bad. Second, it's not good to be too glassy. A manga is a manga, and the national conditions of each country are different. I always feel that to deal with Western racism and discrimination, of course we must resolutely fight back. But there are some criticisms, just laugh it off, change it if there is any, and encourage if there is no one. Don't forget that the real self-confidence is to dare to laugh at yourself. You can't criticize this, and you can't criticize that. It's not good to be too glassy. Of course, India, I'm definitely not talking about you. Third, India is indeed very Indian. Anyway, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine is not afraid of Russia, but it is afraid of India. There is also Der Spiegel, if you draw India, you can draw India, why do you involve us in China? Of course, it is more interesting to read an analysis article in the German media. It said that many Germans criticized India and felt that Monk Jong-ir was confused. Isn't that what Indian trains are like? The cartoonist draws quite vividly. Moreover, the article also ridiculed that some Indians also said that this overloaded train should be from Bangladesh, not India. Sisters Iobeo first briefly introduces friends who don't know the details, and reviews the summary of the previous situation. On May 22nd, a Zaya Hongshu user sent a long article to report that Cathay Pacific's flight attendants discriminated against non-English speaking passengers, and attached a recording of her flight. Once this matter was exposed, it caused an uproar across the internet. The president and official spokesperson of Cathay Pacific apologized several times yesterday and today respectively, and stated that the flight attendant involved would be fired. But that wasn't enough to quell public anger. Sister Bao originally thought that this matter would fade out of everyone's sight sooner or later with the passage of time. After all, it has been 3 days since the incident happened. However, because of a post by a foreign reporter, the incident of discrimination in flight once again brought Cathay Pacific to the forefront. According to the reporter's understanding, the foreign reporter is a New Zealander named Mandarin, who is currently a new media practitioner working in Shanghai. He has more than 1 million fans on YouTube, Bilibili, Twitter and other platforms, and he is also a column editor for Shanghai Daily. The day after the Cathay incident, Mandarin uploaded a video on various platforms, describing the rude treatment he received on a flight from Shanghai to Hong Kong about 4 years ago. He was flying Dragonair, which was part of Cathay Pacific at the time. According to his disclosure, because he graduated from the Chinese language and literature major of Fudan University in Shanghai and has lived in China for more than 10 years, he blurted out such a Mandarin sentence as a matter of course, "Hello, I would like a glass of Coke Zero with ice cubes, thank you." However, the flight attendant replied very angrily, "I'm from Hong Kong, I can't speak Mandarin." This made him feel very puzzled. Most of the passengers on this flight were mainland passengers, and he had just clearly heard the flight attendant ask the passengers in Mandarin as they walked through the front row, "What do you want to drink? Orange juice, coffee or mineral water?" Why does the flight attendant ignore him when he speaks Mandarin as a foreigner? Didn't you just speak Mandarin with those people? Don't be so rude, okay? The flight attendant replied, "Yes, but I'm from Hong Kong and I don't speak Mandarin." And Baran didn't understand why this happened, but asked for Coke Zero with ice cubes again in Mandarin. The flight attendant angrily took out a plastic cup and slapped it on his small table. After pouring Coke, he made a cold face and wanted to leave. "Ice cubes. Ice cubes," reminds Amber, which makes for a very comical end to the experience. But this is just the full stop of his personal experience, because not far away, The flight attendant was laughing at an old man who couldn't understand Cantonese and didn't know whether he should take off his seatbelt and stand up. He can't understand human language. After Mandarin released the video, many foreigners joined the discussion. A foreign netizen living in China said, "I took my Chinese wife on the plane, and the two of us sat on the left and right sides of the same aisle. When the flight attendants came, they treated me and my wife obviously differently. They were not polite to her at all, even rude. These people didn't know that my wife was fluent in English than they were, and they didn't know that we were husband and wife. After a while, they saw the two of us talking in English, and they immediately served her with the kind attitude they had just treated me, which was a world of difference." Another netizen from Latin America said, "I also live in Southeast Asia and have experienced a similar situation. I tried to communicate in Mandarin, but I was not welcomed." Some overseas Chinese also participated in the discussion. Ms. Chen, who works in Australia, said in an interview that when she was flying from Sydney to Hong Kong, the flight attendant asked her what she wanted to drink, and she said in English, sparkling water, dot. The flight attendant said very arrogantly, "No." She pointed to the cart, which clearly contains sparkling water. "But I don't want the flight attendants to be condescending. That's not called sparkling water, it's called soda water." He looked like he wanted to teach her English mistakes. Ms. Chen found it ironic and replied, "In Australia, Europe, and North America, we all call this sparkling water." These experiences all have one thing in common, that is, the flight attendants they encountered did not provide convenience to passengers, but tried every means to embarrass passengers. Moreover, the original intention of the Xiaohongshu blogger who first complained when he wrote a long post was to hope that the airline could improve its service. What she didn't understand was that the flight attendant clearly understood that what the passengers wanted was a blanket, but they misspoken it as a carpet, and even pronounced the word blanket clearly in Mandarin in the recording, but they didn't understand it. Laughing and mocking with other colleagues, if you cannot say blanket in English, you cannot have it. If you cannot say blanket in English, then you cannot get it. Carpet is on the floor. Feel free if you want to lie on it. The carpet is on the floor, if you want a carpet, just lie on it. Hong Kong Chief Executive Li Keqiao also emphasized at the same forum that this is a serious incident, Cathay Pacific needs to conduct a review, and similar situations should not happen again. But on the same day, the Hong Kong media exposed an internal email sent by the Cathay Pacific Union to the staff. The outrageous content in the email once again aroused the outrage of netizens. The email said, "Cathay Pacific's flight attendants are currently facing many false accusations and rumors on the internet. According to the in-flight service delivery manual, if the flight attendants are filmed or videotaped by passengers without their consent, filming or photography, you can ask passengers to delete relevant content, and if you are refused, you can notify the captain and the cabin service manager." The company's policy shows that it adopts a zero-tolerance attitude towards unruly passengers, and will take all feasible measures to ensure that employees are given the right to deal with related incidents. Full support. Obviously, the president has repeatedly admitted to the service negligence and omissions. In the eyes of the union, it turned black and white into passengers making unauthorized recordings to spread rumors. In the short term, Cathay Pacific will not come down from the hot surge. And the most embarrassing thing is that Putonghua, as the common language of China, is actually discriminated against in its own land, and regardless of skin, it seems that speaking Putonghua is inferior. Please remember, Hong Kong is Hong Kong, China, and Chinese is the first language. According to the newspaper Sister, Cathay Pacific is not an issue of apology and dismissal at all, but a manifestation of long-standing malpractices, and it is a matter of not standing up at all. Seeing this, many people will blurt out, "Earn money from your fellow countrymen, but don't treat your fellow countrymen as human beings." Wouldn't it be over if you boycotted? We must know that public opinion plays an important role in promoting the collapse of a company, but the most important thing is to be determined by the market. Especially for Canadian students and Chinese, Cathay Pacific's advantage in air ticket prices to China will be irreplaceable for a while. Not only the air tickets to Hong Kong, but even the air tickets for many connecting flights to the mainland are less than $1,000 Canadian dollars. On the other hand, Cathay Pacific has just issued 1,500 free round-trip economy class tickets from Vancouver to Hong Kong. You only need to pay a tax of about $460 to play for free. We are worried about being unfairly treated when flying with this airline, and we are also entangled in the price-performance ratio. Still on Xiaohongshu, many Canadian Chinese netizens are posting for help. Is there any improvement in Cathay Pacific's word of mouth recently? I plan to buy a ticket for Cathay Pacific to transit through Hong Kong during the summer vacation. The fare is quite cheap, just over $800. I don't know if I should buy it. The comments below are also full of tongues. Some advise to pay more to buy a direct flight with Air Canada, some suggest to speak English, and some suggest to show their PR card or passport at critical moments. They are all worried about encountering unfriendly flight attendants. In general, Cathay Pacific still has a long way to go. If it can have the slightest awareness of Michelle I City, maybe everyone will not be so angry. After all, as a well-known company, no one has a dark history. It is also based on cost performance, and it is also a service industry, so the difference is so big.